Hi, my name is Sam Knights. I'm one of the directors of Shute Festival. A very warm welcome to you all for our first event of 2021. We are delighted to be back with a veritable feast of events this year. Thrilled that we have Annie and Rachel to open it, two very dear friends of the festival who've both spoken at it in the historic days of it being live. When we dipped our toes into the online world last April for the first time, we couldn't have foreseen this would be our mode for this year as well. But we've gathered such a lovely group of followers from all over the UK and all over the world. So we're very glad to be able to continue engaging with you all. Many of you have already found the chat box on the right-hand side, and there is a dedicated ask a question box at the bottom for questions. So please do start putting those in there, and Rachel will aim to get to as many as she can later on. I'm going to hand over in a minute to Rachel, who's going to be hosting tonight. But before I do, I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to have two such preeminent poets here this evening. You couldn't be in better hands with Rachel, who's going to host this. Rachel has herself published 3 collections of poetry and is a co-editor of another 2. But more importantly, we have in Rachel the very person to whom Annie's Hiddensee is dedicated. So Rachel and Annie, over to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks. And welcome everybody to this event. I think you're going to have a fantastic time. I'll just say a few words of introduction and then we will launch into the reading. I just wanted to say a few things. So first of all, I came to know Annie through Andy Ching, who's the managing editor of Donut Press. And Andy worked with Annie on her first publication, Avoids Officer Achieves the Tree Pose. And I'll just hold up a copy of that. There we go. And this was published in 2006. So Annie and Andy used to meet for editorials in Annie's then London loft flat, often with the heating system broken, freezing to death in a Scorsese film. Delighted with what a great debut Annie was about to unleash on the world. And it was Andy who approached Annie with a view to publishing with Donut. Annie has always been top drawer at London poetry readings, as many of you will know, some of them involving real donuts being launched from one end of a room into an ice bucket at the other end of the room. I don't know if any of you remember that occasion. And since then, she's flourished, not just as one of our most original and inimitable poets, but also as a painter and a socialite par excellence. Her work is extremely sociable, from celebrating being with other poets, including many of you, having late night chats, to inventing characters and personas in the manner of Robert Browning, Ezra Pound, or Fernando Pessoa. She's always on the lookout for interesting viewpoints, as you'll see if I simply read out a list of her poem titles, and her curiosity knows no bounds. So, Annie, I wondered if you would read us your poem, Why I Am a Painter, and say a little about the relationship between the Hiddensee painting that's reproduced in the book and the title poem. I was wondering which came first and what dynamics were at play between these two art forms.
Okay, well, what happened was when I was still a Londoner and I lived in Stoke Newington, in order to be able to afford living in my house, I advertised for lodgers. And very soon after, a young couple, Antje and Kai, appeared at the door. He was from East Berlin, she was from West. They were a very solid couple, and they took one look at the rooms and said yes. And so they moved in. I did say to them, go away and think. And they said, we don't need to think. We love the rooms. So there they moved in. And I remember the night of their moving in, because I was in my sitting room and I could hear them speaking German coming down the chimney flue from upstairs. And having been brought up with a sort of terror of the idea of Germany, although that dissipated, I heard the German language spoken in my house fluently, and then we just got on with it. They would have their colossal breakfasts, and I would be amazed. And we became really good friends, and I visited them often, and they came to me. And then what happened was, by then I had a studio, and I was beginning to paint in oils in a sort of serious way, in a way I'd never done before. And they came, and I had made a painting of a little photograph that my grandmother had made of a painting of the house on Hiddensee, where my grandparents used to spend their summer holidays in the 20s and 30s. And I showed it to them, and they looked at it and said, Hiddensee, that's where we go for sauna. That's where we go for relaxation. You must come. You must come. And so a few weeks later, I flew to Hamburg and I met them. And then we got into their kind of SUV and we drove at the most terrifying speed. In Germany, speed is very slow. I mean, people drive at 200 kilometers an hour without blinking. And then we got to the ferry. And, all ferries are wonderful. Ferries are wonderful because there's a sort of lovely feeling of traveling from one world into another. And they have two adorable sons. And when we arrived on Hiddensee, this is an island in the shape of a seahorse. When you arrive, there are wheeled metal wagons with the name of your hotel on them, and you put your bags into the little metal cart and you trundle down the sandy streets to where you're staying. And we had a just remarkable, strange time in this very silent, beautiful, relaxing place. And so when I was writing this collection, I had to write about what Hiddensee and what it meant to my grandmother, and I wrote this poem. About the experience of making a painting. That painting took 500 hours of work, and it's a wonderful thing. Because in principle, when you're writing a poem, you can write it on the back of a laundry ticket. But when you're painting, your whole body is engaged. You have to decide what to eat for breakfast, how you're going to dress. You have to gather your materials. Physical fitness is involved, the back and forth. This is my poem, Why I Am a Painter. In this phase of my life, I'm unable to be serious about much else. Now I'm in bed, I think about the puppet show of Moby Dick I saw last October in a corrugated hut, and when the sail of the tattooed ship unfurled on a hinge, we were on the rolling seas, and Queequeg's Yojo jigged on the deck. The great white whale hung down in the spot the harpoon was in every scene of Ahab's quenchless feud. Which of these I'll keep, and which not, I have yet to decide. I'd be unfaithful to everything that's dear for the sake of my painting. I don't even appreciate the scrambled eggs on my plate. I love the infinite pains, the near madness it takes to paint the slope of a roof, the feeling of intoxication. I love being deliberate. Having accidents, I love it even when it's hopeless. Sometimes I'll say, look at that rose. Nothing could be more arresting. I must admit, it's only when the subject's already in my mind can I be asked. And next is Fez, its pockmarked walls and myriad windows like eye sockets, its crenellations, zinc roofs and cobalt rhomboids, the suggestion of an inner courtyard. And when I take 4 paces back to appraise my work, I feel the apertures of my pupils expanding and contracting in real time. And this is how it comes to me that lack of quality is itself a measure of quality. And that makes all the difference. I hold up my palette knife to steady myself, take infinitesimal quantities of paint, mix them slowly at first, then faster, until the consistency is perfect before leaning into the picture.
Oh, that's wonderful. I noticed also you dedicated that to a mutual friend, Patrick Brandon.
Yes, I love
fantastic
things.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I really noticed, not just about this particular collection, although perhaps it's more so here, is your sheer dexterity of form. Your appetite for creative work really shows through in this collection, which is such a tour de force. I just wanted to ask you if you'll, in a moment, read 3 shorter poems to give the audience an example of this dexterity you've got. And with such an engaged and curious stance to have on the world, how do you go about selecting which material you'll work from? How do you filter out all of that stimulation and your reactions to it?
Well, I suppose I have to say I'm a very avid internet surfer. I see an interesting drawing by somebody. I want to know who made it. I want to know where they came from. I want to know who their influences were. I want to know if they're right. So in a way, one of the most exciting things is this sort of terrifying instant access to people who really think great thoughts and study very carefully, and makes me feel very modest because, I am not a scholar myself, but I have access to extraordinary scholarship, and that's one of the things that drew me to being close with you. And so it's about the things that swim into view, really. And it's always to do with an intimate connection. It's always to do with somebody I'm close to or I love or whose opinions I'm seeking. And this first poem I'm going to read on that particular sort of approach is a poem called Lines Composed on a Carved Pew. And I've always been immensely attracted and fascinated and saddened by the history of the Reformation and its lasting and tremendous impact on English, or should I say British culture? I'm not quite sure what the right term is these days. Anyway, I was with my daughter and we were, how did this happen? We went to a miraculous church. I'm a great church. I'm not, if I say I'm not religious, I don't really know about that quite. But I visit a lot of churches. It's one of my favourite activities. We went to a small church in the village of Ufford, outside Woodbridge. And in that church, there were remarkable 500-year-old carvings of strange figures, heraldic beasts. But most particularly what attracted me was an extraordinary carving of a chatelaine, pregnant, praying in her costume amongst these grotesques. And it made the most profound effect on me. And it was like, having been there, I had to go away and write the poem fast. Lines composed on a carved pew. 21st of August, 1644, was a hot day, and Basher Dowsing, Cromwell's chief iconoclast, beheld, as I do now, the cover of the Willoughby's baptismal font, pinnacles, crockets, finials, rising to the rafters like a pope's triple crown, topped with a gilded pelican plucking at her breast for blood to feed her young, and with Trimley, Brightwell, and Levington smashed earlier that day, he told his men to spare it from the axe. Behold then this carving of a woman, hands folded in prayer over a swollen belly, tilted a little back for balance, kneeling in her worldliness of linen fold, butterfly coif and wide-spanned collar, flattering her fineness among the dogs and bearded wood roses. What was she praying for? A safe birth? A boy that has his father's eyes and lives? Her own sweet neck. The third poem I shall read to respond to Rachel's question is a poem in which the main subject is a character called Antoine Roquentin. He is the protagonist of Jean-Paul Sartre's La Nausée, one of my favourite books. It has many hideous passages, terrible sequences of unconscious blah, blah, blah. But all the same, I admire that book tremendously. And I had a sort of fantasy about having a love affair with that character. Roquentin. He had no one to talk to, exiled in this dump where his hours of slumber and wakefulness were jarred by the clank of the late night train in the long silence. Sometimes he heard a cry. I'd like to have known him, this weird guy. I picture us next to each other in a cinema, leaving together before the end, hanging about in front of the lit up windows of the stores. Back on the street, we'd have swapped summaries of childhood, a tally of our favourite authors. Would there have been some monkey business? Would we have held hands as true lovers do? While he beavered over his pointless research, I'd have shackled myself to a little job, nothing fancy, at a local firm where I'd go each day with a sandwich for my lunch, prepared the night before. Would I have got bored with his long fits of gloom, his act of love, utilitarian and abrupt? Would he have got bored with my capacity for pain, my wish that he should find me always beautiful? Who cares? It's you, my reader, to whom I sing this dubious tale for the hell of it, and to ease my spirit For is it not the duty of all literature to lighten our remorse, our nagging fear?
That's wonderful. It's one of my favourite novels too. I read it 3 times and I kept getting stuck in the same place, which just so happened to be before he has his major revelation. So it took me 3 goes to actually get to that point of the book, and it was only over the page. And then I really enjoyed that novel. It's fantastic.
My favourite moment in it is the radishes in the restaurant with you.
Would you read us? May I put in a little request for one of your shorter poems? Could you read the second one in your collection, Rambo's Ovaries?
Yes, I'd love to.
I just so admire the language in that poem. It would be great to hear it.
Okay, well, this is, one of the loveliest things about writing poetry is once you commit yourself to it, gifts arrive strangely packaged. Mm-hmm. I was working with a very dear friend, John. He was curating an event I was doing for the Winchester Poetry Festival. And I was absolutely bowled over by the meticulous way in which he curated our event, every detail, every image, every sequence, so sort of finely judged by him and his amazing support. And I remember the morning where we were left the hotel. The hotel had once been a prison. And she looked at me and he said, "Focus." So I feel... Now, the poem came from a conversation that he doesn't remember that I know happened, where he told me about an event in which someone meaning to talk about Somewhere Over the Rainbow instead said Rambo's Ovaries. He absolutely denies this conversation happened. I know it did. Rambo's Ovaries, a mondegreen for our times. Birds move abroad. Sad armies raid armoires. Suave Eros daubs a morbid vase. Admires ordure, bids a rose adieu. Murder sires murder. Buries Obard's muse. A dossier, massive, abrasive, biased, arrives. Boom. Odium's rude brass marauds our ears. Bravado rams demur aside. Idioms embarrass us. A rabid virus devours a biomass as Ovid's rubied rivieras void bruised bodies overboard. Osaria brim.
As I hinted earlier, Annie, one thing that really stands out for me among your work is that your knack of this very sociable knack you have of inhabiting various personas in your poems. And it takes serious empathy to be able to pull that one off in the way that you do. When we come to talk about Jacques Tornay later and your translations of his work, this theme of empathy will come to light a little more. For now, I was wondering if you will read, we'll read together a longer poem, The Levite and the Concubine. And I'm particularly interested in how this biblical material from Judges would overlap perhaps with your own interests or even stories. Could you say a quick word?
Yes. Well, I discovered this story from a thing on, I think probably on Netflix, called Greenleaf, which is a many events and series, and it goes on and on and on, about an Afro-American evangelical church with massive business interests and a certain amount of abuse and corruption at its core. I was very arrested by it and couldn't stop watching it. And at one point in the story, the teenage daughter of the main character arrives home one day from Bible class, announces to her mother the story of the Levite and the concubine with the most tremendous teenage pain. How can a book of such huge significance to her and her beliefs in her life contain such horror? And her mother, in a sense, dismisses her anxiety by saying, it's simply that terrible things happen and no one says anything. And I couldn't separate myself from this story. And I did a great deal of study of it. I kept reading interpretations of what this event in Judges meant. And it seemed to chime very strongly with a particularly difficult few weeks of my life when I was in my mid-20s or so. The Levite and the concubine. It's hard to arrive late at night in a town where no one knows you, and the marketplace dark and unwelcoming, rubbish clattering around your feet, and you have travelled far for a purpose which is not of your choosing, for an event in which the only part you have to play is to endure. What patience is required of you, having been sweet-talked into leaving, as I was, for a holiday in Champagne with the in-laws, to find that 2 days in, the father of my child was hitched to a low-paid job repairing televisions, out all day in a van with his mates, his mother all over him when he pitched back at the flat, beaming from his exertions, while I, with a heavy baby in my arms and no pushchair, confined to the narrow bedroom of his boyhood, mechanical toys still in their boxes, stacked to the ceiling, Camus, Villon, and Brel, bearing down from their photographs like hateful gods, nowhere to put anything but the floor, stood staring out of the window at the apartment blocks, all played nice, showed gratitude, celebrated the entente cordiale with my in-laws, Gainsbourg and Birkin on the TV, her bottom thumping the grand piano, je t'aime, moi non plus, while soup was ladled into bowls. As so often in the kitchen of another woman, the knives were blunt, the cooker had a mind of its own, and nothing worked. 1 week became 2. In the third, time slowed. Stay with us, they said, as day after day I unwrapped the ham, sliced the potatoes, wiped the oilcloth, bought nappies and formula, tried to keep myself tidy and the baby happy as winter approached and my eyes swam with tears I could not shed. Each day I carried her into town, where my in-laws toiled in their shop on the marketplace. Restez, they said, restez. I responded with a smile and thought of the apartment where we had been so happy before our marriage, for which I'd signed a tenancy, living, as it's stated in a subclause, en concubinage.
There was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. And the concubine played the whore on him and went to her father's house and was there for 4 whole months. And the Levite arose and went after her to speak friendly to her. And she brought him to her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And he abode with him 3 days. So did they eat and lodge there. And when the Levite rose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him, Therefore be lodged here again. Eat, and make merry. Tomorrow get you early on your way. And the same again another day. But the Levite would not tarry more, and arose with 2 asses, and the servant and the woman. And when they were by Jebus, the day was almost spent, and they passed on, and went their way to Gibeah to lodge, and sat them down on a street of the city, but no man took them into his house. Out of that hostile darkness stepped an old man, himself but a visitor to the town, and seeing them surrounded by their worldly goods, called, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? And hearing the Levite reply that he was from Bethlehem, on his way to the house of the Lord, warned him of the danger of staying on the street, and invited him into his house for rest and refreshment. And the old man said, Peace be unto thee, howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me. So he brought them into his house, gave provender to their asses, and as they washed their feet, and did eat and drink.
Everyone knew someone in the champagne industry. Even quite tumble-down houses like those in the Badlands where the river flooded and wheelless cars rusted in the yard had a fridge in the lounge stocked with unmarked bottles ready to be opened if anyone called. In the harvest time, when the miners came down from the north, the fumes were so strong we were drunk just from driving around. Every inch of the ground was covered with vines, right to the edge of the road. One night it was late in the forest of Hiddensee. My man's hit a stag, and a dinner was planned. The in-laws would babysit. I put on a shirt dress of clinging brown silk, slid my legs into tights in a shade called nuage, stepped into staggering peep-toe sandals, made up my eyes, my lips, and my face. Quelle beauté, my in-laws explained. There was then a custom among people of kissing twice on both cheeks, on meeting and parting, whenever they met, and hundreds of kisses were traded that night in the tribe of young French marrieds under the yoke of Giscard d'Estaing, sat around the burnished meat while our host told the story of the garter of his bride, eased down her leg between the teeth of the winning bidder. T'aurais vu le bordel? While les potes stamped and howled. And now, drunker than I'd ever been, I wanted to let rip, to boast of my lost wild years, my LSD trips, and I began on Angleterre. And the talk switched from cars and weddings and drinking to Buckingham Palace, chapeau melon et bottes de cuir, roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, and God Save the Queen. And the demon of hatred rose in my throat, and I stood and threw up on La Moquette. Next day we heard that Franco was dead.
And as they were making merry, the men of Belial beset the house about, and beat at the door, and spake to the old man, saying, Bring forth the man that came to thine house, that we may know him. And the master of the house, the old man, said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly. Behold, here is his concubine. I will bring her out now, and humble ye her, and do with her what seemeth good unto you, but unto this man do not this vile thing. So the man brought out his concubine forth unto them, and they knew her all the night unto the morning, and when the day began to dawn, they let her go. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and fell down at the door of the house. And her lord rose up in the morning, and opened the doors of the house, and went out to go his way, and behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said unto her, Up, and let us be going. But none answered. Then the man took her upon an ass, and the man rose up and gat him unto his place. And when he was come to his house, he took a knife and laid hold on his concubine, and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces, and sent her to all the coasts of Israel. And was so that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider it, take advice, and speak your minds.
On that grey November morning, I picked up my baby, walked into town to the marketplace, and stood at the door of the shop, watching the slow procession of people mark the end of a tyranny. I knew that the sentence of those weeks in which my life almost narrowed to extinction was coming to an end, but not so the sentence of one who inherits the habit of human destructiveness to the extent that I did, and who endlessly, heroically tears himself to pieces without knowing they're doing it themselves. And although the price of escape could be the inability to look anyone in the eye, I say to you, and you, and you, stand up, leave.
That's fantastic. It's good to read that with you, Annie. It's being a longer poem, it seemed better for the audience that we find a way to make the most of those dramatic voices. It would be nice to read that one again sometime with you.
Yeah, we will.
Okay, we're going to have to just skip a little bit as time's pressing on. Your poetry synthesizes such a range of cultural references. It's pretty mind-blowing. I wanted to finish off by asking you about your poems in French in this collection and your work as a translator. In the notes to your collection, you say, one of the delights of translating poetry is finding hitherto undiscovered words and expressions that possess a unique piquancy. It's also clear that the meta subject here is the preservation of language and the politics around that, how learning other languages can be a stay against insularity. Can you read us a couple of your translations of the Swiss poet Jacques Tornay and tell us why you're drawn to his work? I note also that in your afterword to the selection of his poems, you talk about the importance of the nous, or the we, not just in Tornay's poetry, but in the act of translation, but as a general ontological principle. Could you tell us something about this sense of plurality?
Yes. Well, one of the most unexpected and enriching experiences I've had as a writer is occasional moments where it's very clear that the poem one has written lives in the mind of another. It comes unexpectedly. And during the time, the quite long years in which I was translating Jacques Tornay's work, this is something that happened to me. Jacques Tornay died 2 years ago, almost to this day. And during the time he was alive, I would send him ideas I had for the translations of his work. And he was always he always treated my ideas in a very sort of liberal way. You know, I really like it. The meaning is slightly different, but what you've done is really nice. And then after he died, I devoted myself much more seriously to making sure that my excavations of his work was thorough and honouring of what he was saying. And so these translations went through, I think, 3 or 4, maybe 5 stages. You know, initially sort of literal attempts, and then later a bit over-interpretive, and later much more sort of forensic. And I compare it slightly to that thing where you've cooked your roast in a pan, and when you clean the pan, there are still some scraps attached to the metal of the pan, and you devote yourself to cleaning the pan so that all the fine juices and the meaning are actually taken account of. And that is how I arrived at these translations. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but I hope to some extent it does. But
well,
the
aspect that I'm kind of getting at is in terms of plurality, how the I is another, the I and the we, where that kind of middle ground or crossing over point is.
Well, in the sense, there is no I without you, thou. There is no thou without me, without I. It's the in a way, it's sort of the meta-psychology of human interaction, about how I make you and you make I, particularly where relationships that are depthful enrich our lives. And also the idea of the wholeness of the self when talking to the other, and the wholeness of the other when talking to the I. And as I grew older, these things become increasingly important to me. The whole presence of myself in the view of the other, and the whole presence of the other in the view of myself, where the trust is such that the editorial process is no longer so necessary as a sort of armor of self-protection. So I'd be quite delighted to read a few of Jacques' poems. Are we doing all right?
We are, yeah. We'll have time for a few questions afterwards.
Okay, all right. This is one of my favorites. Jamael. A poet once lived in our district, then left. We will call him Jamael. There was no door on which to knock, only a pair of sandals, propped ready for departure, on the step of the cottage, built of ancient boulders laid flat, like elongated O's. A feathered body, fed by flames, prolific dreamer, he devotes himself to the harmony of merging streams, woos the eloquence of plain speech, and can break the Astor's code. He finds a Romany girl, and they are like two swallows, happy together after their long migrations. A great fan of possibilities opens itself to him. The bliss he thought was lost returns, and the echo of a rustling sheaf of barley, luminous, untamable, hurries to his side. Jean-Maël has an arm to steer a path through winter, a voice as sonorous as mist. His nights are jeweled with wild berries. In another life, he was the battering wind in the treetops. It's a lovely poem of memory. It comes back to me today. A scattering of miniature fortresses in the bed of the stream. A sunbeam dazzling the Virgin on her icon, searching the spiral staircase of a vanished house. The punctual arrival of a singing blackbird, magnificent brother, rain falling on skin, soft to the touch, the lure of brioche on the table one morning, to the sound of church bells, scarlet vestments on the Feast of the Assumption, paraded round the field, marked by the foot of the plough, in the dull glow of a halo, at the foot of the hill. This ash tree, so tall when I was a boy, is still growing, a sunrise hand-stitched, centuries old, a minstrel famed for his shambling verses, a solitary poppy like a sentinel on my plot, my dreams filled with receding footsteps, a ball of mist sitting above the lake, a hotel room's buff-coloured carpet scuffed by the feet of insomniacs, the face of he that I once was and am still to this day. And perhaps to finish, I will read, this is an uncollected poem that hasn't been published before my book here, so I'm immensely proud to have it here. This is the name engraved. Muffled piano scales announcing autumn reach me from a room at the end of a passage. Daylight ferments to a tindery yellow. Shadows walk around on their own with no human form in front or behind. Each object seems infused with its precise purpose. A swarm of imminences is coming. The October moon is growing a beard to warm its cheeks. I'll go back to my cemetery walks. I'll scatter my thoughts on the chilled earth. I've ordered myself a brown suit for the occasion. I might as well be properly attired among those who aren't. If the fog does not choke me, I'll hum one of the Psalms of David under my breath to reassure everyone, myself included. Better still, I'll write something of my own on all the minutiae of life that paradoxically suffice to fill it. On leaving, I'll wave to the company, my people and those unknown to me, those whose names engraved on stone or wood I've passed 100 times and who have become almost my friends. I'll amuse myself with a harmless love affair or two, the kind that leaves the heart unscathed, now more fragile as winter approaches. I'll write a book and read 100. My rebirth will take place in spring, set down as a gift at my feet. The inside of my skull will be carpeted with green moss. I'll set out on the road to a cherished country where I'll be welcomed like a currant in a bun.
Thank you, Annie. That's a beautiful reading. We do have a little time for any questions. If anyone wants to ask Annie any questions, and then probably about 5-10 minutes, I think. If we don't have any questions, I guess, Annie, maybe we can have an encore. Just keep an eye on the question box.
Okay.
Okay, there is one at the moment. You've had a request from Lisa Clifford to read your poem Aubergine.
Yes.
And also perhaps you could say something about that collection just as a way of introducing it.
Okay. Well, my book, The Remains, was written after an awful lot of loss. My mother died, my father died, my stepfather died, important friends of mine died. And during that period, I was making a garden. And every time I sunk my trowel or my spade into the ground, because where I live had been a sort of dumping ground for just stuff that people chucked out. Shards of china, strange little toys, all sorts of model things appeared in the ground. And when it rained, the earth would throw up strange things. I got lots of them, but not to hand. It was probably just around this season when pubs were still open. And I think I and my husband went out for a Sunday sort of late morning drink before the ritual of lunch and so on. And I needed to get home and cook. And it was one of those days where the sun appears from an extremely sharp angle. And I wrote this: aubergines. Sometimes I still go out in quest of aubergines, one of the outsiders in the vegetable world, unpromising, deceptive, truncheon-like, rubbery, sexual, seamless, more purple than the mantle of Caligula. And as the story goes, the imam fainted. Once in the shop, I hesitate because I know they'll sit there on my worktop, losing their luster. Brown patches will appear along their buxom flanks. Their cottony insides will shrivel and implode until I throw them out in self-disgust. The sun was shining low and bright. I came home from the pub, and without a second thought, I slid 6 fine-cut slices from the board into the smoking oil. I was Scheherazade, wielding my spatula in ecstasy, telling stories to myself, eating discs of melting gold.
We've got a few more poem requests here, but there's a very good question from May. Do you think of poems when you're painting? I suppose you could ask that the other way around as well. That goes back to your Hiddensee question in a sense. Do you think of poems when you're painting?
When I'm painting, I'm in a completely different mode. When my paintings take a great deal of planning in advance, possibly a year, the idea reaches me. It appeals to me. There are images that feed it. Then, as the moment where the painting may become possible, Then there is the task of selecting the canvas, preparing the canvas, thinking about what I mean by the particular picture. Then, although this hasn't happened with the particular painting I'm hoping to make next, then there is the question of diet. How do I start the day? Painting is like a dance. You're on your feet all day. You need energy, but you don't need the kind of food that knocks you out and saps you. And these choices are difficult to make. You need a choice for your palate. Not too much, because it will confuse you. Just enough to sustain you, because you know it will be replaced and rubbed out later on. So if I'm going to relate painting to writing, it's to do with selection. But the major difference for me is that painting for me is a physical activity, like dancing or walking or boxing or riding or swimming. And that, because the physical activity is so dominant in the action, all that needs the most careful preparation.
We have a request, and in fact we've only got 5 minutes left, so I wonder if we could just have an encore poem. And I wondered if you'd read, there's a section in your book of cancer poems. Would you be happy to read the Lions of Chemo?
Yes, I've done. Yeah.
And then we'll hand over to Sam.
Okay. Yeah. Here we go. A couple of years ago, my husband Dave was diagnosed with a very aggressive lung cancer, and our whole lives were taken up with terror, basically. His treatment, the consultant, she was a very extraordinary fox-like woman. I remember sitting with her in her consulting room with Dave, and she fixed him with her foxy, sharp gaze, and she said, "You are going to survive if you do absolutely everything we tell you in the way we tell you to do it." It was remarkable. It made me think that cancer specialists get, maybe they get very particular training in how they deliver their messages, but it had the most extraordinary focusing impact. And after that, he began chemo. And then after that, radiotherapy. And that's when life got very, very hard. And I had this endless recurring dream of lions in the house, in other places, out in the garden. And I wrote this: The Lions of Chemo. Perhaps the lions were distracted by the sound of laughing women gathered in their summer dresses, handing plates of chicken salad to each other, the chink of cutlery and glass, the constant babble of the fountain in the garden coming through the open doors. Although restless, they made no sudden moves, showed no trace of appetite or curiosity, apart from a hypnotic pause in their circuits of the room, a cautious inspection of the valance round a chair. At one moment, the field of my entire vision was filled with a lion's yellow skin. In the weeks that followed, marked by the rhythm of epoticide on dazitron, dexamethasone, filgrastim. A lion still appeared to me from time to time, posing couchant in the snow or dozed outside the bathroom door, registering my presence with no more than a sigh or twitch of an ear. Each day on waking, I could not erase their savage flicker from my mind or control the quaking of my heart, but I had work to do, suppers to prepare, standards to keep, when I realized one February afternoon, stepping halfway down the stairs, that they were there for my protection, and decided henceforth I'd adopt the crimson garb of Saint Jerome, emulate his perfect stillness, at ease perhaps for the first time in my life, all the implements of study within reach, thinking of life's gripes, its lusts and torments, knowing there's a lion waiting in the clerestory.
Annie, thank you again for reading your beautiful poems to us. We're going to hand over back to Sam again, if she's there. There we go.
Wow, you two are an amazing duo together, I have to say. I mean, it's beautiful. I'm reading your poems, right now, Annie. They are stunning. But actually having you read them together is so powerful. I mean, every one of them, you sort of dive into this incredible, different, very powerful world. And I love the sort of underlying theme of you wanting to live your life more intensely. I think actually at the moment that's such a incredibly important thought to keep us all going in this time. So thank you both so much. When I'm listening to you speaking as well, I'm remembering both of you at different years at Shute Festival, being there live. There were very, very special events. And thank you to our lovely audience as well. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your questions. It's really wonderful to have you here, and a beautiful way for us to begin Shute Festival this year. So join us again, buy Annie's books, buy Rachel's books, support our lovely local bookshop, Archway Bookshop, and support Donut Press, wonderful publisher. Andy Ching, I think, is also listening in this evening, Rachel's partner. So yeah, it's really lovely to have you all here, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time with Bijan Omrani in conversation with Armand Dangle on Socrates in Love. So stay well all in the meantime, and good evening.
Thank you.